The blood-red sunrise caught Savannah Morrison off guard as she hurried to draw water from the well, her sleep-deprived body protesting every step. She'd been up half the night tending to her ailing father, and the ranch wouldn't run itself. Not since her mother had passed 3 winters ago, leaving Savannah to manage both the household and much of the outdoor work that kept their modest cattle operation in Colorado territory afloat. It was 1876, and at 22, Savannah had already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship. Her hands, once soft and delicate as her mother had hoped they would remain, had grown calloused and weathered from years of labor. She wore those calluses like medals of honor, even as the local townswomen whispered that no decent man would want a bride whose hands felt like leather saddles. Savannah paid them no mind. The Morrison ranch needed her strong hands more than she needed a husband who'd flinch at her touch. The bucket splashed as it hit the water below, and Savannah began the laborious process of cranking it back up. The morning air carried the familiar scent of sage and dust that defined this stretch of land 40 miles from Denver. Their ranch wasn't the largest, but it was theirs, free and clear provided she could keep up with the taxes and make this season's cattle drive profitable. "Miss Morrison," a voice called out, startling her so badly she nearly lost her grip on the well handle. Approaching on horseback was the last person she expected to see this early Sheriff Thomas Edwards. His weathered face bore the grave expression she'd come to recognize as his bearer of bad news look. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, continuing to draw the water. "What brings you out to our place before the roosters have properly announced the day?" He dismounted, removing his hat in that solemn way men did before delivering difficult news. "I'm afraid I've come about your father." Savannah's heart plummeted. "He was resting comfortably when I checked on him an hour ago." "It's not that, Miss Morrison. Doc Sullivan sent me to inform you that your father's condition, well, it's worsening. The laudanum isn't helping like it should, and the doc says the consumption is spreading faster than he anticipated." She absorbed this news with the same stoic resolve she'd developed over years of setbacks. "I see. And what does the doctor suggest?" "He's recommending your father be moved to Denver to the hospital there. They have specialists who might be able to help." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "But I understand your situation here. I cannot leave the ranch," Savannah stated flatly, finally pulling the water bucket to the rim of the well. "And I certainly cannot afford specialists in Denver," the sheriff nodded, having expected this answer. "Doc thought you might say that. He's asked me to tell you there's a fellow coming through these parts. A man who worked with some fancy doctor back east, has experience with consumption treatments newer than what Doc Sullivan can offer. He's stopping in town for a few weeks before heading to California." Hope flickered briefly in Savannah's chest before reality extinguished it. "And I suppose this traveling miracle worker charges accordingly?" "Actually," the sheriff said, replacing his hat, "he's working for room and board mostly. Seems he's more interested in helping folks than making his fortune. Doc thought perhaps you could offer him lodging in exchange for treating your father." Savannah considered this. A stranger on her property wasn't ideal, but if there was any chance to save her father. When would this man arrive? "That's just it. He rode in last night. Doc wants to bring him out this afternoon if you're agreeable." With the water bucket now full, Savannah lifted it with practiced strength. "Tell Doc Sullivan he can bring this man by. I'll have the old cabin cleaned out by then." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll let him know, and Miss Morrison, if you need any help, we're managing just fine, Sheriff, but I thank you for your concern." As the sheriff rode away, Savannah carried the water toward the house, her mind racing through all the additional tasks she now needed to complete before afternoon. The old cabin hadn't been used since the last ranch hand had left 6 months ago, unable to tolerate working for a woman who insisted on doing a man's share alongside him. Inside the modest ranch house, she set the water bucket down and moved quietly to her father's room. James Morrison lay sleeping, his once robust frame now shockingly thin beneath the quilt. His breathing came in shallow rasps, each one a victory against the disease consuming his lungs. She touched his forehead gently, relieved to find it cool. The night's fever had broken, at least. As she adjusted his blankets, her father's eyes fluttered open. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you're up with the sun again." "Just like you taught me," she answered with a smile she didn't feel. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like I could wrestle a bear," he joked weakly, then coughed. "Or perhaps just a very small calf." She poured him a small cup of water. "Sheriff Edwards just rode by. Doc Sullivan is coming later today with someone who might be able to help you." Her father's eyes, still sharp despite his illness, studied her face. "And what will this help cost us?" "Just a clean cabin and meals," she replied, helping him sit up to drink. "Doc found someone with experience treating consumption who's passing through." James Morrison took a small sip of water. "We're not charity cases, Savannah. No, we're not. We're offering fair trade lodging and food in exchange for medical care." She kept her voice firm. "And I won't hear arguments about it." A ghost of a smile crossed her father's pale lips. "You're as stubborn as your mother was." "I'll take that as a compliment." After ensuring her father was comfortable, Savannah set about her morning chores at double speed. The cattle needed checking, eggs needed collecting, and now the cabin required attention. She worked methodically, her hands moving through each task with practiced efficiency. By mid-morning, she'd fed the animals, gathered eggs, checked the nearest pasture where the cattle grazed, and started on the cabin. The small one-room structure stood about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. She swept out months of dust, changed the bedding, and made sure the small stove was operational. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and solid. As she worked, her thoughts kept returning to this mysterious healer. She'd heard stories of charlatans who traveled from town to town, peddling colored water as miracle cures and disappearing before their deceptions were discovered. But if Doc Sullivan vouched for this man, perhaps there was reason for hope. By early afternoon, exhaustion was setting in, but Savannah pushed through. She'd just finished preparing a stew that would feed them all when she heard the approach of horses. Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped onto the porch, squinting against the bright sunlight. Doc Sullivan's familiar buggy came into view first, followed by a rider on a magnificent chestnut stallion. Even from a distance, Savannah could tell the horse was well-bred and well cared for, unusual for a traveling doctor working primarily for room and board. As they drew closer, she got her first look at the man who might be her father's last hope. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat straight in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone born to ride. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable in town but not unkempt, and a neatly trimmed beard framed his face. He wore simple clothes, a blue shirt, dark vest, and denim pants rather than the formal attire she'd expected from someone with medical training. Doc Sullivan pulled up first, his kindly face breaking into a smile. "Afternoon, Miss Morrison. I've brought company as promised." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. As he approached, Savannah noticed his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Miss Morrison," Doc Sullivan continued, "allow me to introduce Vaughn Hayes. Mr. Hayes has extensive experience with pulmonary ailments and has graciously offered to examine your father." The man stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Morrison," he said with a slight nod. His voice was deep but gentle, with an accent she couldn't quite place, not quite Southern, not fully Eastern. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged, studying him carefully. He didn't look like any doctor she'd ever seen. In fact, everything about him, from his worn boots to the way his eyes scanned the property with practiced assessment, reminded her more of a rancher than a healer. "I understand you have experience treating consumption." "I do," he confirmed. "I worked with Dr. Robert Koch in Germany for a time. He's leading research on the disease." Savannah raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. Even this far west, she'd heard of Cox's groundbreaking work. "And what brings you to our small corner of Colorado?" A shadow passed over Vaughn Hayes's face. "I'm heading to California. Personal reasons." His tone made it clear the subject wasn't open for discussion. "Doc Sullivan mentioned your father's case, and I offered to help if I could." "Mr. Hayes was a godsend during that influenza outbreak over in Willow Creek last month," Doc Sullivan added. "Saved more lives than I could count." Savannah nodded slowly. "Well, Mr. Hayes, we've prepared the cabin for you." She gestured toward the small structure. "It's modest but clean. You're welcome to settle in, and then perhaps you could examine my father." "That would be fine, thank you." While Doc Sullivan and Vaughn Hayes retrieved the latter's belongings, Savannah returned inside to check on her father. She found him awake and had just helped him into a sitting position when the men entered. "James," Doc Sullivan greeted warmly, approaching the bed. "I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Vaughn Hayes. He has considerable experience with cases like yours." James Morrison studied the newcomer with the shrewd gaze of a man who'd spent a lifetime judging the character of those he dealt with. "You don't look like any doctor I've ever seen," he observed bluntly. Vaughn Hayes smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "That's because I'm not a doctor, sir. At least, not in the way you mean. I was a field medic during the war, then studied under physicians in Europe. I don't hold formal credentials, but I've treated many cases of consumption." "The war, eh? Which side?" James asked, ever direct. "Union, sir. 8th Illinois Cavalry." James nodded approvingly. He'd been too old to fight but had supported the Union cause. "Well, Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your honesty. Most traveling healers would have claimed to be surgeons to the Queen of England by now." Vaughn moved closer to the bed. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward James's chest. With James's permission, Vaughn began a thorough examination. His hands moved with confident precision as he listened to James's breathing, checked his pulse, and examined his throat and eyes. He asked detailed questions about symptoms, duration, and previous treatments. Savannah watched, increasingly convinced that whatever Vaughn Hayes might be, he certainly wasn't a charlatan. "Your father's case is serious but not hopeless," Vaughn finally declared, straightening up. From his saddlebag, he produced a small wooden case. Opening it revealed several glass vials neatly organized. "I'd like to try a treatment regimen I've had success with before. It won't cure the consumption, there is no cure yet, but it may ease his symptoms and slow its progress." "What's in those vials?" Savannah asked, skeptical. "This one contains an extract of willow bark natural salicin, which reduces fever and pain. This is a tincture of wild cherry bark to ease coughing. And this," he held up a dark bottle, "is a more complex preparation that helps reduce the inflammation in the lungs." Doc Sullivan examined the medicines with interest. "These are similar to what I've been prescribing, but I'm not familiar with this last one." "It's based on Dr. Cox's research," Vaughn explained. "I can't claim it cures consumption, but I've seen improvement in patients who use it regularly." "And the cost?" James asked weakly from his bed. Vaughn turned to him. "As I understand it, room and board for as long as I'm here. I plan to stay at least 2 weeks, possibly longer if needed." "And if you can't help me?" Vaughn met the older man's gaze steadily. "Then you'll have lost nothing but the food I eat, sir. I make no promises I can't keep." James looked at his daughter. "Savannah, this is your decision as much as mine." She considered their options, which were few. "We accept your help, Mr. Hayes, and offer our hospitality in return." Doc Sullivan seemed relieved. "Excellent. I'll check back in a few days, but I leave James in good hands." He patted Savannah's shoulder. Both sets of good hands. After Doc Sullivan departed, Savannah showed Vaughn to the cabin. He carried surprisingly little for a traveling man, just 2 saddlebags, a bedroll, and a wooden case she assumed contained more medicines. "I'll have dinner ready in about an hour," she told him as he set his things down. "There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I've left clean towels on the chair." "This is more than adequate, Miss Morrison. Thank you for your hospitality." She lingered in the doorway, studying him as he surveyed the small space. "Mr. Hayes, I should be clear about something." He turned to her, eyebrows raised inquiringly. "My father is all I have left. If you're not what you claim to be, if those medicines are just colored water and empty promises, I'll find out. And I don't take kindly to being deceived." Rather than taking offense, Vaughn nodded solemnly. "I understand completely. I wouldn't expect anything less." After a pause, he added, "Your father is lucky to have such a fierce protector." She didn't acknowledge the compliment. "I'll call you when dinner's ready." Throughout dinner, Savannah observed Vaughn closely. He ate with the hearty appetite of a working man but maintained impeccable manners. He answered her father's questions about his travels and medical experiences without hesitation or contradiction. The stories he told rang true, filled with the kind of specific details that were hard to fabricate. When James tired, Vaughn helped Savannah settle him for the night and administered the first doses of his medicines. His hands were gentle but confident as he tended to her father, and the respect with which he treated the older man did not go unnoticed. "Your father should rest more comfortably tonight," Vaughn told her as they left James's room. "The wild cherry bark will ease his cough, which should help him sleep." "Thank you," she said simply, leading the way to the kitchen. "Would you like coffee before you retire to the cabin?" "That would be welcome, thank you." She busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his eyes on her as she moved around the kitchen. When she handed him the steaming mug, their fingers brushed briefly. She noticed his hands, then strong and capable, but with the same telltale calluses that marked her own. "You're a cowboy," she stated, taking a seat across from him. It wasn't a question. Vaughn smiled slightly. "Among other things, yes, I was born on a cattle ranch in Texas. Spent most of my youth on horseback." "That explains it," she murmured, sipping her coffee. "Your hands," he glanced down at them. "Ah, yes, some marks never fade, no matter how long you're away from the work that caused them. How does a Texas cowboy become a student of German doctors?" His expression turned distant. "The war changed many things. I was wounded at Gettysburg, not badly, but enough to land me in a field hospital. The doctor there took an interest in me, taught me to assist him. After the war, he sponsored my studies in Europe." He shrugged. "Life takes unexpected turns." "Indeed it does," she agreed, thinking of her own journey from the daughter of a successful rancher to the overworked caretaker of a failing operation. "May I ask about your ranch?" Vaughn inquired, changing the subject. "I noticed your herd seems small for the size of your grazing land." Savannah stiffened. "We've had to sell off stock gradually since my father fell ill. I manage what I can on my own. No ranch hands, we had one until recently. He didn't appreciate taking orders from a woman." Her tone dared Vaughn to comment on this. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Running a ranch single-handedly is nearly impossible. I'm impressed you've managed as well as you have." She wasn't sure if he was being sincere or condescending. "We do what we must to survive, Mr. Hayes." "Indeed we do, Miss Morrison." He finished his coffee and stood. "If you don't mind, I'll check on your father once more before I turn in." After Vaughn left for the cabin, Savannah sat alone in the kitchen, contemplating their strange new arrangement. There was something about Vaughn Hayes that unsettled her, not in a threatening way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself. Perhaps it was simply that he was the first man in a long while who had looked at her as a woman rather than a curiosity or an object of pity. Whatever it was, she reminded herself that he was here to help her father, not to complicate her life further. She had enough challenges already. The next morning arrived with a gentle rain that promised to bring relief to the parched land. Savannah was already preparing breakfast when Vaughn knocked on the door, his hair damp from the walk between buildings. "Good morning," he greeted. "I thought I'd check on your father before breakfast." She gestured toward James's room. "He had a better night." "I only heard him coughing once or twice." When Vaughn emerged from examining her father, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The medicines are helping with the symptoms, at least. His breathing sounds a bit clearer this morning." Over breakfast, Vaughn surprised her with a question. "Would you allow me to help around the ranch while I'm here? I noticed your fence line needs repair in several places, and I'm sure there are other tasks that require attention." Savannah hesitated. Pride urged her to refuse, but practicality won out. "I wouldn't want to interfere with my father's treatment. Treating your father requires only a small portion of each day. I'm not accustomed to idleness, Miss Morrison, and I'd rather earn my keep more fully." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Very well. There's always more work than hours in the day around here." After breakfast, they set out together to check the cattle. Vaughn rode his chestnut stallion while Savannah mounted her reliable gray mare. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a freshly washed landscape and the earthy scent of wet soil. "Your land is beautiful," Vaughn commented as they rode. "How long has your family been here?" "My father claimed this land 15 years ago, just after the war ended. We moved from Missouri when I was 7. She pointed toward the distant mountains. "He chose this spot because of the water access and the natural shelter those ridges provide during winter storms. He chose wisely. This is prime cattle country." "It was," she agreed. "Before the drought 3 years ago, before my mother passed, before my father fell ill. We ran nearly 300 head back then." Vaughn whistled low. "That's a substantial operation. How many do you have now?" 42, she admitted. "Barely enough to make a profit on the drive to Denver, but I'm hoping to build back up over time." They spent the morning riding the property, with Savannah pointing out areas that needed attention. Vaughn listened attentively, occasionally offering suggestions based on his own ranching experience. By midday, they had developed a plan for the most urgent repairs. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Mornings began with Vaughn checking on James and administering medications. After breakfast, they would work on ranch tasks until midday. Savannah would prepare lunch and tend to her father while Vaughn continued working. In the afternoons, they often worked together again until sunset approached. To Savannah's surprise, Vaughn proved to be both knowledgeable and hardworking. He repaired fences, mended the barn roof, and even helped her move the cattle to fresh pasture. His skill with horses was evident in the way her normally skittish stallion responded to his calm handling. One afternoon, about a week into Vaughn's stay, Savannah found herself working alongside him to repair the chicken coop. The close quarters meant they occasionally brushed against each other, each contact sending an inexplicable warmth through her body that she firmly ignored. "You're good with your hands," Vaughn observed as she skillfully replaced a broken slat. "Necessity is a thorough teacher," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. "Though I imagine you've had similar lessons." He nodded, hammering a nail with precise force. "Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know, whether we want to learn it or not." "Is that what happened with your medical knowledge? Life forcing lessons upon you?" Vaughn paused, considering her question. "In a way, yes. The war thrust me into situations where I had to learn quickly or watch men die. But later, the study of medicine became a choice, a way to make sense of all the suffering I'd seen. And now, why are you heading to California instead of practicing medicine somewhere?" His expression closed slightly. "As I said, personal reasons." "You're running from something," she stated bluntly. His eyes met hers, surprise evident in their blue depths. "What makes you say that? A man with your skills could establish himself anywhere. Doctors, even unofficial ones, are desperately needed throughout the territories. Yet you're constantly moving, working for room and board when you could command actual payment." She shrugged. "That suggests you're more interested in not being found than in building a life." Vaughn's laugh held little humor. "You're uncomfortably perceptive, Miss Morrison." "Savannah," she corrected impulsively. After working side by side for a week, formality seemed unnecessary. "Savannah," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Vaughn," she nodded, returning to her work. They continued in companionable silence until she asked, "Is my father improving?" Truly, Vaughn's expression grew serious. He's responding to the treatments better than I initially hoped. His breathing is easier and the fever hasn't returned. But consumption is a persistent enemy, Savannah. I can help him be more comfortable and perhaps slow its progress, but you can't cure him, she finished, voicing the truth she had already accepted. No, he confirmed gently. I wish I could offer more hope than that. Honesty is more valuable than false hope, she replied, driving a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. I appreciate your frankness. That evening, James felt well enough to join them for dinner at the kitchen table, the first time he had done so in weeks. Though still weak, his eyes were brighter, and he managed to eat a full serving of the rabbit stew Savannah had prepared. Watching her father engage in conversation with Vaughn, discussing everything from cattle prices to politics, Savannah felt a knot of tension she'd carried for months begin to loosen. After James retired for the night, Savannah found herself alone with Vaughn on the porch. The evening was cool but pleasant, with a canopy of stars spreading across the dark sky above them. They sat in rocking chairs, the soft creaking of wood against floorboards the only sound for several minutes. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet in the stillness. "For giving me more time with him." Vaughn's profile was illuminated by the soft glow from the window behind them. "Your father is a fighter, and he has something powerful to live for," she glanced at him. "What's that?" "You," he said simply. "He's determined not to leave you alone to face this world." Something about the way he said it, not with pity, but with understanding, made tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, unwilling to show such vulnerability. "The world doesn't frighten me," she stated, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "No, I don't imagine it does." Vaughn's voice held a note of admiration. "But that doesn't mean you should have to face it alone." The conversation shifted then to lighter topics, funny stories from Vaughn's travels, tales of the early days on the ranch that Savannah remembered from childhood. When she finally bid him good night, Savannah realized she had laughed more in that single evening than she had in the past year. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of her hands in the lamplight. Rough, calloused, with short nails and a fresh cut across one palm from the day's work. Not the hands of a proper lady, as her mother would have lamented, but hands that had kept her family alive, that had built and maintained and protected everything they had. For the first time, she wondered what Vaughn thought of her hands. Then she immediately chastised herself for such a frivolous concern. What did it matter what a passing stranger thought of her appearance? He would be gone soon, continuing his journey to California, while she remained here with her responsibilities and her ailing father. Yet as sleep claimed her, her mind drifted to the image of Vaughn's hands, strong and capable, with their own stories of hard work etched into the skin, and how they might feel intertwined with her own. The following days brought unseasonably hot weather, making the ranch work even more demanding. Despite the heat, Vaughn continued to help with various projects, often insisting that Savannah rest while he completed the more strenuous tasks. "I'm not some delicate flower," she protested one particularly scorching afternoon when he tried to take over the hay baling. "I never suggested you were," he replied calmly. "But even the strongest among us need rest occasionally. Besides, your father was asking for you earlier." This effectively ended her resistance, as concern for her father overrode her pride. She found James sitting up in bed, looking through an old leather-bound journal. "Papa," she said, entering the room. "Do you need something?" He looked up with a smile that reminded her of happier days. "Just your company, Savannah." "It seems I see more of that cowboy doctor these days than I do my own daughter." She sat beside him on the bed. "That's because you've been sleeping so much, which is good for your recovery." He hummed noncommittally. "And nothing to do with the fact that you and Hayes have been working side by side from sunup to sundown." Savannah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "He's offered his help while he's here. It would be foolish to refuse when there's so much that needs doing." Her father's knowing look made her uncomfortable. "He's a good man," James observed. "Reminds me a bit of myself at that age, capable, hardworking, honest. He's passing through, Papa. In another week or so, he'll continue on to California and we'll likely never see him again." James tapped the journal thoughtfully. "Plans change, Savannah. Life rarely follows the path we expect." He handed her the leather book. "I've been reading your mother's journal. Did you know she never intended to marry a rancher? She had her heart set on a banker from St. Louis." Savannah took the journal, surprised. Her mother had rarely spoken of her life before meeting James. What changed her mind? James's eyes twinkled. "I convinced her that adventure and love were worth more than security and boredom. It took some doing. Your mother was as stubborn as you are, but eventually she saw things my way." "And did she regret it? The hard life out here, away from civilization," her father's expression softened. "There were difficult days, certainly. But no, she never regretted choosing love over convenience. She told me so on the day you were born and again on the day she died." His hand covered hers. "Don't close yourself off to possibilities, Savannah. Life is too short for such caution." She wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected advice. "I should check on dinner," she said finally, rising from the bed. "You should rest more." As she left the room, her father called after her, "Observe his hands, Savannah. You can tell everything about a man from his hands." She pondered her father's words as she prepared the evening meal. Vaughn joined her in the kitchen after finishing his work outside, washing up at the basin by the door. She found herself studying his hands as he rolled his sleeves down afterward, strong, tanned, with long fingers that moved with precision whether they were mending a fence or measuring medicine. Hands that had both taken lives during war and saved them afterward. Hands not so different from her own. "Is something wrong?" Vaughn asked, catching her staring. "No," she said quickly, turning back to the stove. "Just thinking about all we've accomplished this week." He moved to stand beside her, reaching for plates to set the table. "The ranch is in much better shape now. Another week of work, and you'll be well prepared for winter." The casual mention of his departure in a week sent an unexpected pang through her chest. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, to having a partner in the endless work of running the ranch. More than that, she'd come to enjoy his company, his quiet intelligence, his dry humor, the easy way they worked together as if they'd been doing so for years. "What awaits you in California?" she asked, the question escaping before she could consider its propriety. Vaughn paused in his task, his expression growing distant. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "A chance to start fresh, perhaps, running from something, as I suspected." He met her gaze then. "Not running from, but toward. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Both involve leaving something behind." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Vaughn said softly, "Some things are worth leaving behind. Others." His eyes held hers, are harder to walk away from. Before she could respond, a knock at the door broke the tension. Sheriff Edwards stood on the porch, looking apologetic for the interruption. "Evening, Miss Morrison, Mr. Hayes. Sorry to disturb your dinner, but I've got news that couldn't wait." He twisted his hat in his hands. "There's been trouble in town. A family passing through has fallen ill with something Doc Sullivan hasn't seen before. High fever, terrible cough, rash across the chest." He asked if Mr. Hayes might come have a look, given his experience. Vaughn's expression immediately shifted to professional concern. "How many are affected?" "The whole family, parents and 3 children, and now 2 townspeople who helped them when they first arrived are showing symptoms." Savannah saw the decision in Vaughn's eyes before he spoke. "I'll gather my supplies and ride in with you, Sheriff." "What about my father?" Savannah asked, anxiety rising. Vaughn turned to her. "I'll prepare enough medicine to last 3 days. With luck, I'll be back before then." "Your father is stable now. Just ensure he continues taking the treatments as scheduled." As Vaughn hurried to gather his medical supplies, Savannah felt a strange mixture of pride in his willingness to help and fear at the thought of him facing an unknown illness. She prepared a bundle of food for him to take, working silently alongside him as he measured medicines and wrote detailed instructions for her father's care. When it was time for him to leave, she walked him to his horse. The sheriff had already mounted up and waited a discreet distance away. "Be careful," she said, handing him the food bundle. "Whatever this illness is." "I'll take precautions," he assured her, securing his bags. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. The touch of his fingers against her work-roughened palm sent a current through her body. "Savannah," he began, his voice low and intense, "when I return, you should hurry," she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say. "Those people need your help." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. With practiced ease, he swung into the saddle. 3 days, he promised. "I'll return in 3 days." She watched until both riders disappeared into the gathering darkness, then returned to the house with a strange emptiness in her chest. The kitchen seemed too quiet without Vaughn's presence, the evening routine hollow without his participation. Her father observed her distraction during their evening meal but said nothing until she was helping him prepare for sleep. "He'll come back," James said as she adjusted his pillows. "Of course he will," she replied, trying to sound unconcerned. "His things are still here and he promised to continue your treatments." James gave her a knowing look. "That's not why he'll return, Savannah." She busied herself with straightening the blankets. "You should rest now, Papa. It's been a long day." The first day without Vaughn passed slowly. Savannah threw herself into ranch work, tackling tasks they had planned to do together. By evening, she was exhausted but satisfied with her progress. She administered her father's medicine exactly as Vaughn had instructed, relieved to see that James continued to rest comfortably. The second day brought unexpected visitors, Doc Sullivan and Sheriff Edwards. Their grave expressions immediately set Savannah on edge. "What's happened?" she demanded before they could even dismount. "Is it Vaughn?" Doc Sullivan shook his head. "Mr. Hayes is fine, working tirelessly to treat the ill, but we've had to quarantine the north end of town. The disease is spreading faster than we anticipated." "What is it?" she asked, leading them inside. "Mr. Hayes believes it's a form of scarlet fever but with unusual symptoms," the sheriff explained. 5 more people have fallen ill since he arrived. He asked us to bring more of his supplies," Doc Sullivan added, producing a list in Vaughn's handwriting. "And to tell you he may be delayed longer than expected." Savannah's heart sank, but she nodded briskly. "Of course, I'll gather these items right away." As she collected the medicines from Vaughn's cabin, the sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Morrison, there's something else you should know." She looked up, instantly alert. "What is it?" "There was a man in town yesterday asking questions about a medic traveling through these parts. Described Hayes pretty accurately." "What kind of questions?" "Wanted to know where Hayes was headed, how long he'd been here. Said he was an old friend from the war, but something didn't sit right with me." The sheriff adjusted his belt uncomfortably. "I didn't tell him anything, but he's still in town, waiting for the quarantine to be lifted." Doc Sullivan frowned. "I didn't like the look of him either. Has a cold way about him, eyes like a rattlesnake." Savannah remembered Vaughn's reluctance to discuss his past, his apparent need to keep moving. "Did this man give a name?" Called himself Marcus Blackwood, claims to be from Chicago. The name meant nothing to Savannah, but she filed it away. "Thank you for telling me. I'll let Vaughn know when he returns." After the men departed with the requested supplies, Savannah sat with her father, recounting the conversation. James listened thoughtfully, his condition noticeably improved after nearly 2 weeks of Vaughn's treatments. "Sounds like your cowboy doctor might be in some kind of trouble," he observed. "He's not my anything, Papa," she corrected automatically. "Isn't he?" James challenged gently. "I've seen how you look at him, Savannah, and more importantly, I've seen how he looks at you." She busied herself with adjusting her father's blankets. "Even if there were feelings, it doesn't matter. He's leaving for California, remember? Plans change." James repeated his earlier sentiment. "Especially when the heart becomes involved." That night, unable to sleep, Savannah found herself drawn to Vaughn's cabin. She told herself she was merely checking that everything was secure, but in truth, she sought some connection to him in his absence. The small space was neat and orderly, with his few possessions arranged with military precision. On the small table beside the bed, she noticed a book, not a medical text as she might have expected, but a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman. She picked it up, surprised to find a man like Vaughn reading poetry. Opening to a marked page, she read, "We were together, I forget the rest." The simple line struck her with unexpected force, capturing exactly how she felt in Vaughn's company. Returning the book carefully to its place, Savannah exited the cabin with her thoughts in turmoil. Was her father right? Had she allowed herself to develop feelings for Vaughn despite knowing he would soon leave? And if so, what was she to do about it? The third day passed with no word from town. Savannah performed her chores mechanically, her mind elsewhere. By the fourth day, anxiety had taken root. Was Vaughn ill himself now? Had the mysterious Blackwood found him? Or had he simply decided to continue his journey without returning for his belongings? On the afternoon of the fifth day, as Savannah was mending a saddle on the porch, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Her heart leaped at the sight of a lone rider on a chestnut stallion, then plummeted as she realized the man in the saddle was slumped forward, barely staying mounted. She dropped her work and ran toward the approaching horse. As it drew nearer, she confirmed her fear. Vaughn was conscious but clearly unwell, his face flushed with fever, his normally alert eyes glazed. "Vaughn," she called, reaching for the reins as the horse stopped. "What happened?" "Savannah," he managed, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. Should have been more careful." She helped him dismount, alarmed at the heat radiating from his body as he leaned heavily against her. "You've caught the fever," he nodded weakly. "Treated the others, thought I'd avoided it, started feeling ill on the ride back." With considerable effort, she helped him to the cabin, easing him onto the bed. "What do you need? What medicines?" Despite his condition, Vaughn's mind remained sharp enough to give her instructions. She worked quickly, preparing the treatments he indicated while helping him remove his boots and outer clothing. His normally tanned skin was alarmingly pale beneath the flush of fever, and his breathing came in labored gasps. "Your father," he murmured as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "His medicine." "Don't worry about Papa now," she soothed. "He's doing well, let me take care of you." A ghost of a smile crossed Vaughn's fevered face. "My capable Savannah," he whispered before closing his eyes, exhaustion claiming him, "my capable Savannah." The words echoed in her mind as she continued tending to him. When had she become his? And when had she begun to think of him as hers? The next few days passed in a blur of worry and exhaustion. Savannah divided her time between caring for her father and nursing Vaughn through the dangerous fever. The scarlet rash Vaughn had described appeared across his chest and neck, and his temperature soared to frightening heights despite her constant attention. During one particularly bad night, when Vaughn's fever peaked and he thrashed in delirium, Savannah feared she might lose him. She bathed his burning skin with cool water, administered the medicines he had prepared for others, and spoke soothingly to him when nightmares seemed to grip him. In his fever dreams, Vaughn called out names she didn't recognize, comrades from the war, perhaps, or patients he had lost. He spoke of blood and gunfire, of a woman named Elizabeth who had deserved better, of his inability to save everyone. And occasionally, heart-stoppingly, he called for Savannah, his hand reaching blindly until she took it in her own. "I'm here," she would assure him, her calloused fingers intertwining with his. "I'm right here, Vaughn." On the third night of his illness, as she sat beside his bed, exhaustion finally overtook her. She fell asleep with her head resting on the edge of his mattress, her hand still clasping his. She awoke to the gentle sensation of fingers stroking her hair. Lifting her head, she found Vaughn awake, his eyes clear of fever for the first time in days. He looked weak but present, the worst of the illness apparently broken. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice rough from coughing. "Of course I stayed," she replied, straightening and trying to ignore the intimacy of waking to his touch. Someone had to make sure you didn't die on my property. Think of the paperwork. A smile tugged at his lips. Heaven forbid I inconvenience you with my death. Exactly, very inconsiderate. She pressed a hand to his forehead, relieved to find it cool. Your fever's broken. Thanks to you. His hand captured hers as she withdrew it. Savannah, I owe you my life. Consider it payment for helping my father, she said, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity in his gaze. She gently extracted her hand from his. You should rest. I'll bring you some broth. As she moved to leave, Vaughn called after her. Who's been caring for your father while you've been tending to me? The simple question stopped her in her tracks. In her concern for Vaughn, had she neglected her father? Guilt washed over her as she realized she had been giving James only the most basic care these past few days, focused as she was on saving Vaughn's life. I've been checking on him, she defended weakly. He's been stable, taking his medicines. Vaughn's expression held no judgment, only understanding. You can't do everything, Savannah. No one could. The gentle observation broke something inside her, a dam of self-reliance and stoic endurance that had held back her fears and exhaustion for months. To her horror, tears filled her eyes. I'm trying, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm trying so hard to hold everything together, but it's never enough. The ranch is failing, my father is dying, and I'm so tired, Vaughn. I'm just so tired. In an instant, despite his weakness, Vaughn was sitting up and reaching for her. She went to him without thinking, allowing herself to be drawn onto the edge of the bed and into his embrace. His arms encircled her as the tears she had held back for so long finally broke free. You don't have to do it all alone, he murmured into her hair as she cried against his chest. It's all right to need help, Savannah. It's all right to rest sometimes. She allowed herself the luxury of his comfort for several minutes before pulling away, embarrassed by her breakdown. I'm sorry. You're the one who's ill, and here I am, being human, he finished for her, his hand moving to cup her cheek. Never apologize for that. The tenderness in his touch nearly undid her again. She stood abruptly. I should check on Papa and start breakfast. And you need broth to regain your strength. Vaughn let her go, though his eyes followed her to the door. Savannah, he called softly, stopping her once more. Thank you, not just for saving my life, but for trusting me enough to show me your heart. She couldn't find words to respond, so she simply nodded before hurrying back to the main house. Over the next few days, Vaughn recovered his strength rapidly. Though still weak, he insisted on resuming his treatment of James and helping with light chores around the ranch. Savannah protested, but he was stubborn in his own quiet way. I've been idle too long already, he told her when she tried to make him rest. Besides, you need help, real help, not just sympathy. She couldn't argue with that truth, especially as the time for the fall cattle drive approached. If they were to get their small herd to market in Denver, preparations needed to begin soon. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vaughn broached the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them since his return from town. Sheriff Edwards mentioned someone was asking about me, he said, his voice carefully neutral. A man named Blackwood, Savannah nodded. He said the man claimed to be an old friend of yours from the war. Vaughn's jaw tightened. He's no friend. Marcus Blackwood was a doctor at the Chicago hospital where I worked after the war. He's been following me for nearly a year now. Why? She asked, turning to face him fully. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Because I know what he did, he finally said. During the war, Blackwood served as a surgeon for the Union, like me. But he conducted experiments on wounded soldiers, both Union and Confederate, without their knowledge or consent. Treatments that caused more suffering than the wounds themselves. Horror filled Savannah as she absorbed this. How could anyone do such a thing? He claimed it was for the advancement of medical science. Vaughn's voice held controlled anger. After the war, I found him doing similar things at the hospital in Chicago, using poor patients, immigrants mainly, as unwitting subjects for his research. When I confronted him, he threatened to ruin me to claim I had been his willing assistant during the war. "But you weren't," Savannah stated with certainty. Vaughn met her eyes. "No, but he's a respected physician with connections, and I'm just a former cowboy with field medical experience." My word against his wouldn't have been enough, so I gathered evidence, his journals, witness statements, and took them to the hospital board. What happened? They dismissed him, but quietly to avoid scandal. No criminal charges, no public disclosure. He lost his position but kept his reputation. Vaughn's hands clenched into fists, and he blamed me entirely. He's been tracking me ever since, determined to exact revenge. Each time he gets close, I move on. "That's why you're heading to California," Savannah realized. "You're still running." Vaughn nodded grimly. "I thought I'd lost him in Denver. I should have known better." "What will you do now?" He sighed heavily. "Continue with my original plan, I suppose. Once your father is stable enough and you've completed the cattle drive, I'll move on. Perhaps Blackwood will lose interest eventually." Savannah absorbed this information, her mind racing. The thought of Vaughn leaving, especially now, knowing he was fleeing from danger rather than toward opportunity, filled her with unexpected despair. In the weeks of his presence at the ranch, he had become essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Or you could stay," she suggested, the words emerging before she could reconsider them. Vaughn looked at her in surprise. "Stay." "Savannah, if Blackwood finds me here, then we'll face him together," she interrupted, suddenly certain. "This ranch is 40 miles from town with clear sight lines in every direction. No one approaches without us knowing well in advance. You'd be safer here than constantly moving, always looking over your shoulder." "It's not just my safety I'm concerned about," Vaughn said softly. "If Blackwood discovered I had attachments, he wouldn't hesitate to use them against me." Attachments. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. "Are you saying you're leaving to protect me?" Savannah asked, incredulous. "Vaughn Hayes, I've been protecting myself and this ranch since I was old enough to hold a rifle. I don't need you to make decisions about my safety without consulting me." A smile flickered across his face. "No, I don't suppose you do." The smile faded. "But Savannah, what are you suggesting? That I simply stay here indefinitely, as what, your ranch hand?" She held his gaze steadily. "As whatever you want to be." The implication of her words was clear, and she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of possibility expanding between them. "Savannah," Vaughn finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you certain you know what you're offering?" She rose from her chair and moved to stand before him. With deliberate intent, she extended her hands, palms up. "These hands have built and maintained this ranch through drought, illness, and hardship. They're not soft or pretty, but they're strong and capable." She paused, gathering her courage. "And they're lonely, Vaughn, as am I." He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Taking her offered hands in his own work-roughened ones, he studied them with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your hands," he murmured, "are the most beautiful I've ever seen. They tell the story of who you are, your strength, your determination, your unwavering devotion to those you love." His thumbs traced the calluses on her palms. "From the moment I saw you working this land, I've been in awe of you, Savannah Morrison." He lifted her right hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, then her wrist. The gentle pressure of his mouth against her skin sent shivers through her entire body. "These hands deserve to be cherished," he continued, repeating the gesture with her left hand. "Not despite their roughness, but because of it." Savannah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones she had shed in his cabin, not born of exhaustion and despair, but of a hope she had long abandoned. "Stay," she whispered. "Not as my ranch hand. Not as my father's healer. Stay as my partner, Vaughn, in all things." The last light of sunset cast a golden glow across his face as he drew her closer. "Are you proposing to me, Savannah Morrison?" A small laugh escaped her. "I suppose I am. Is that too forward of me?" "Not at all," he replied, his smile widening. "But traditionally, this part comes first. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose slightly on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as weeks of unacknowledged longing broke free. His arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, drawing him closer still. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I accept your proposal. Yes to all of it, Savannah." Joy bubbled up inside her, pure and unexpected. "Even with Blackwood potentially coming after you, even then," he confirmed, "we'll face him together if he comes. I'm tired of running, and I've never had someone worth standing my ground for until now." A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted them. They turned to find James standing there, leaning on a cane but more upright than Savannah had seen him in months. "I take it congratulations are in order?" her father asked, his eyes twinkling. Savannah flushed but didn't move from the circle of Vaughn's arms. "You were right, Papa, about plans changing," James nodded sagely, "and about judging a man by his hands, I'd wager." "That too," she admitted. "Well, don't let me interrupt," James said with a wave of his hand. "I just came out for some fresh air. Carry on with whatever you were discussing." As her father made his way to the far end of the porch, ostensibly to observe the last colors of sunset, Vaughn chuckled softly against Savannah's hair. "Your father has remarkable timing," he murmured, "and hearing," she agreed. "We should probably continue this conversation somewhere more private." Vaughn's arms tightened around her. "Later," he promised, his voice holding a depth of meaning that sent warmth spreading through her. "We have time now, Savannah, all the time we need." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. With the cattle drive to Denver approaching, Savannah and Vaughn worked from dawn until dusk preparing the herd and making necessary arrangements. They hired 2 local boys as additional hands for the drive, paying them from the money Vaughn had saved during his travels. James continued to improve under Vaughn's care, regaining enough strength to sit on the porch for hours and even walk short distances with assistance. Though the consumption remained, its progress had slowed significantly, giving them all hope for more time together. Word of Savannah and Vaughn's engagement spread quickly through the surrounding area, prompting visits from neighbors who had long kept their distance from the struggling Morrison ranch. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others from curiosity about the mysterious medic who had won the hand of the stubbornly independent Savannah Morrison. Through it all, Vaughn remained steadfast by Savannah's side, working as her partner in every sense of the word. Their relationship deepened as they shared not only the labor of the ranch but their hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. "I want to expand the medical care available in this region," Vaughn told her one evening as they sat by the fire, planning their future. "There are too many people suffering needlessly because they can't reach a doctor or afford treatment. We could build an addition to the ranch house," Savannah suggested, leaning against his shoulder. "A space where you could treat patients who need more than just a single visit." "And expand the herd gradually," Vaughn added. "With proper management, we could double the size within 3 years without overtaxing the land." The ease with which they blended their individual visions into a shared future still amazed Savannah. Never had she imagined finding someone who would value her strength rather than trying to diminish it, who would see her calloused hands as beautiful rather than unladylike. As the day of the cattle drive approached, tension began to build. Not regarding the drive itself, they were well prepared for that challenge, but because of the lingering threat of Marcus Blackwood. Though there had been no further word of him from town, his presence loomed in their minds as they prepared to leave the relative safety of the ranch. "Maybe I should stay behind with your father," Vaughn suggested the night before their departure. "You and the boys can handle the drive." Savannah shook her head firmly. "No, we face this together, remember? Besides, you know cattle better than those boys do. I need you with me." "And what if Blackwood is waiting in Denver?" What if he tries something while we're there? She took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Then we'll deal with him. I'm not letting fear of that man dictate our lives, Vaughn. That's exactly what he wants. The cattle drive itself was grueling but successful. Their small herd fetched better prices than Savannah had dared hope, providing enough money to see them through the winter with some left for improvements to the ranch. Throughout their time in Denver, they remained vigilant, but there was no sign of Blackwood. Perhaps he's given up, Savannah suggested hopefully as they prepared for the journey home. Vaughn looked skeptical. Or he's biding his time, waiting for us to let our guard down. Their return trip to the ranch was uneventful until they were within 10 miles of home. As they made camp for their final night on the trail, one of the young hands reported seeing a rider watching them from a distant ridge. Probably just a traveler, Savannah said, but she exchanged a meaningful look with Vaughn. They both knew better than to dismiss the possibility of threat. That night, they took turns keeping watch, their rifles close at hand. Dawn broke without incident, and they set out for the final stretch home with a sense of cautious optimism. The ranch appeared peaceful as they approached, smoke rising from the chimney where James would be tending the fire despite his weakness. Savannah felt relief wash over her at the sight until Vaughn suddenly reined his horse to a stop, his body tense with alarm. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The door's standing open." Savannah's eyes confirmed his observation. The front door of the ranch house was indeed ajar, something James would never allow given his susceptibility to cold air. "Stay here with the boys," Vaughn instructed, drawing his revolver. "Not a chance," Savannah replied, already urging her horse forward. "That's my father in there." They approached cautiously, dismounting at a distance and advancing on foot with weapons ready. The ominous silence heightened their apprehension until a weak call from within broke it. "Savannah." "Vaughn, Papa." Savannah rushed forward, Vaughn close behind her. They found James on the floor near his bedroom, a small pool of blood beneath his head. He was conscious but clearly disoriented. "He was here," James mumbled as Vaughn carefully examined the wound on his temple. "Looking for you. I told him you weren't here, tried to send him away." Cold fury rose in Savannah as she realized what had happened. "Blackwood did this," James nodded weakly. "Said he'd wait, said he had unfinished business with Vaughn." Vaughn's face had gone pale. "James, I'm so sorry." "This is exactly what I feared." "Stop," James interrupted with surprising firmness. "This isn't your fault, son. That man is evil. You were right to stand against him." As Vaughn tended to James's injury, a painful but not life-threatening blow to the head, Savannah checked the rest of the house. Nothing appeared to be missing, but she found evidence that Blackwood had searched Vaughn's medical supplies, presumably looking for something specific. "He's still here," she said when she returned to the main room. "Or nearby, at least. He said he'd wait, and there's only one place that makes sense." Vaughn nodded grimly. "The cabin." After ensuring James was comfortable and leaving one of the young hands to watch over him, Savannah and Vaughn prepared to confront Blackwood. Despite Vaughn's protests, Savannah refused to stay behind. "We face this together," she reminded him, checking her rifle. "That was our agreement." They approached the cabin carefully, using the gathering dusk as cover. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney, confirming their suspicions. "Someone was inside. Let me go first," Vaughn whispered as they crouched behind the barn. "This is between Blackwood and me." "This became between Blackwood and us the moment he laid hands on my father," Savannah countered. "But yes, you can go first. I'll cover you from here." Vaughn hesitated, then pressed a quick kiss to her lips. "If anything happens to me, nothing will happen to you," she interrupted fiercely. "Now go end this so we can get on with our lives." With a nod, Vaughn moved toward the cabin, staying low and using the shadows for cover. Savannah positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the cabin door, her rifle ready. Vaughn approached the cabin directly, standing tall as he called out, "Blackwood, I know you're in there. Come out and face me." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cabin door creaked open, revealing a tall, thin man with cold eyes and a carefully groomed appearance that seemed out of place in the rustic setting. "Hayes," the man acknowledged with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your charming accommodations." "What do you want, Blackwood?" Vaughn demanded, standing his ground several yards from the cabin. "You know precisely what I want." Blackwood stepped fully onto the porch, and Savannah noticed he held something in his right hand, a small leather case similar to the one that contained Vaughn's medicines. "My research. The journals you stole from me before you so honorably reported me to the board." "I didn't steal your journals," Vaughn replied evenly. "I presented them as evidence of your unethical experiments. The board returned them to you after your dismissal." Blackwood's face twisted with rage. "Not all of them. My most important work, my notes on the treatment of pulmonary diseases, disappeared. And suddenly, you develop remarkable success treating consumption cases throughout the West. That's hardly coincidence, Hayes." Understanding dawned on Savannah. Blackwood believed Vaughn had stolen his research on consumption treatments, research that might have been valuable enough to restore Blackwood's reputation if he could reclaim it. "I never had your consumption research," Vaughn stated firmly. "My treatments are based on Dr. Koch's work in Germany, which I studied firsthand. Nothing I do comes from your unethical experiments, liar," Blackwood spat. "You've built your reputation on my work while leaving me with nothing." "Your reputation was destroyed by your own actions, not mine," Vaughn responded. "And now you've assaulted an innocent man and trespassed on private property. Leave now, Blackwood, before this ends badly for you." A cold laugh escaped Blackwood. "Ends badly for me? You seem to misunderstand the situation, Hayes. I have nothing left to lose." His right hand moved, revealing not medicine but a revolver. "You, on the other hand, have developed quite a few attachments." The gun rose, pointing at Vaughn's chest. "Did you really think I came alone? My associate is currently positioned with an excellent view of the main house. One signal from me, and your precious new family ceases to exist." Fear gripped Savannah's heart, but years of facing danger had taught her to think clearly under pressure. Scanning the area around the main house, she spotted what Blackwood was referring to, a faint reflection of metal from the ridge overlooking the property. Someone was indeed watching the house, likely with a rifle. Making a split-second decision, Savannah adjusted her aim and fired a single shot toward the ridge. The distant figure jolted, then slumped over. Blackwood's head whipped around at the sound, momentarily distracted. Vaughn seized the opportunity, launching himself forward and tackling Blackwood to the ground. The gun discharged harmlessly into the air as the two men struggled. Savannah raced toward them, arriving just as Vaughn gained the upper hand, pinning Blackwood beneath him. The doctor's face was contorted with hatred as Vaughn pressed his arm against Blackwood's throat. "It's over, Marcus," Vaughn said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "Your associate is down and you're finished. You'll never be rid of me," Blackwood choked out. "I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. I'll destroy everything you love." Savannah approached, her rifle trained on Blackwood. "No, you won't," she stated coldly, "because you're going to prison for attempted murder. And if you ever come near my family again, I won't aim for your associate's shoulder next time. I'll aim for your heart." The fierce determination in her voice seemed to finally penetrate Blackwood's rage. For the first time, he looked at Savannah with something approaching respect or perhaps fear. Sheriff Edwards arrived the following day to take Blackwood into custody, alerted by the second young hand whom Savannah had sent to town immediately after the confrontation. Blackwood's associate, a hired gun with no personal stake in the vendetta, readily provided a sworn statement about their plans in exchange for leniency. "The circuit judge will be through these parts in 2 weeks," Sheriff Edwards informed them as Blackwood was led away in handcuffs. "With the evidence and testimonies we have, he'll likely face a significant sentence." "Thank you, Sheriff," Vaughn said, his arm around Savannah's shoulders. "We appreciate your quick response." As the dust settled from the departing sheriff's wagon, Savannah and Vaughn stood together on the porch, watching the man who had cast such a shadow over their future disappear down the road. "You think it's really over?" Savannah asked softly. Vaughn's arm tightened around her. "Yes, I believe it is." Blackwood's obsession was fueled by his belief that I had stolen his research. Now that he knows that wasn't the case, and with a prison sentence ahead of him, I think his vendetta has lost its power. She leaned into his embrace, relief washing over her. "Good. Because we have a wedding to plan and a ranch to build. And a medical practice to establish," Vaughn added with a smile. "We're going to be very busy, Mrs. Hayes to be." "I wouldn't have it any other way," she replied, turning to face him. "Hard work doesn't frighten me, remember." "How could I forget?" He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing tender kisses to the calluses that marked her palms. "These hands remind me every day of your strength, your determination, and your boundless capacity for love." As his lips moved from her hands to her wrist, then up her arm to her shoulder and finally to her lips, Savannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a partner but a home within Vaughn's embrace, a place where her strength was valued, her roughened hands were cherished, and her heart was truly understood. The following spring brought new life to the Morrison Hayes ranch. The winter had been challenging but productive, with Vaughn and Savannah working side by side to implement their plans for the future. They had married in a small ceremony at Christmas, with James proudly walking his daughter down the aisle despite his still fragile health. Now, as the snow receded and green began to return to the landscape, their efforts were bearing fruit. The herd had increased by 15 calves. The newly constructed addition to the main house served as Vaughn's medical office, and patients had begun traveling from neighboring communities to seek his care. James, though still battling consumption, had defied Doc Sullivan's original prognosis. Under Vaughn's constant care, and with the happiness of seeing his daughter well partnered, he had rallied enough to enjoy many good days among the inevitable difficult ones. On a particularly fine April morning, Savannah stood on the porch, surveying the land that had once been a burden and was now a thriving enterprise. Her hands, still rough from work but now occasionally adorned with a simple gold wedding band, rested protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen, home to the newest member of their family, expected to arrive in late summer. Warm arms encircled her from behind as Vaughn joined her, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about so intently, Mrs. Hayes?" she smiled, leaning back against his chest. "About how much has changed in a year, about how close I came to losing this place. About how fortunate I am that a certain medic with cowboy hands happened to pass through our corner of Colorado." "I'm the fortunate one," Vaughn murmured, his hands covering hers over their growing child. "I was running with no destination in mind until I found you. And now?" She asked, turning in his embrace to face him. "Now I'm exactly where I belong." He lifted her hands to his lips, a gesture that had become a cherished ritual between them. "With the woman whose hands built a home strong enough to shelter us all." As Vaughn kissed her, Savannah reflected that life had indeed taken an unexpected turn, one that had transformed her calloused hands from symbols of hardship into badges of honor, cherished by the man who had taught her that strength and tenderness could exist in the same heart, the same hands, the same love. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Savannah's hands remained rough from work. But each night, Vaughn would take those beloved hands in his own equally weathered ones and kiss them clean of the day's labors, a testament to a love that valued strength, honored sacrifice, and transformed the harsh realities of life on the frontier into something beautiful and enduring.